I'm your host, Tim Wood. Welcome to The Natural You, where we'll be interviewing guests from different backgrounds and all walks of life to discuss our relationship with nature and how we can better connect to the natural world, both in us and around us. Nature already has all the answers we need to be healthier and happier in all aspects of our lives. Listen up to hear how to access more of The Natural You. Charles Hall is a nature reserve superintendent of a large area in the Northern Cape region of South Africa. He has a bachelor's degree in animal physiology and honours degree in nature conservation, both from the University of Stellenbosch. In previous roles, he has served as game ranger, ecologist, professional guide and hunter. In his current role, he is responsible for the breeding and welfare of several rare species. He is a man at home in the bush and is deeply connected to the land. In recent years, he has been keenly involved in educational projects, helping local schools and communities reconnect to nature, allowing them to experience the full value of the natural environment. It's through these endeavours of sustainable use principles and education that we see his drive and passion to ensure the conservation of our natural heritage. Hey everyone, welcome to The Natural You. We've got an old friend of mine, a nature conservationist by the name of Charles Hall. We go back a long way. Charles and I were first met at the age of 13 at boarding school. We had fairly similar lives. We were both English-speaking boys from farms, which was mostly in Afrikaans areas, so we had that in common. We were both also quite short and reasonably good at tennis. But it was over those years that Charles and I became firm friends, and just as a story to tell you what kind of a guy this chap is that in our final year of school, we used to play a rugby game against the old boys. And it just so happened that my father and uncle and several cousins were playing in this game. And Charles was at scrum half and I was at centre, and I had to play against my father, who, unlike me, who's quite skinny and not that quick, he was quite broad and with a low center of gravity, and it wasn't a particularly good match. So after about the second time that he had run straight through me and scored under the poles, Charles turned to me and he said in earshot of everyone, "Tackle your father, Wood, damn it." And it's only a mate that can tell you what everyone's thinking and what you really need to hear. So Charles is a no-nonsense guy and has a great sense of humor and also a great storyteller. So I'm hoping to get some insight into his life. We don't tend to chat that much about his work, and I'm really interested to find out about his work in conservation. Charlie, if you can just tell us where you're based at the moment. And I know we had tried to struggle to try and get hold of you because you're not really in range of any Wi-Fi or mobile signal most of the time. So thank you for giving us this time, and we appreciate that. So if you can just tell us a little about where you're at now and what your role is.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. First of all, thanks a million for the opportunity. And it's so great to chat to you. We don't communicate enough, as you mentioned. At the moment, I live just outside of Kimberley, which is pretty much quite central in South Africa, on a beautiful nature reserve called Dronfield Nature Reserve, and we're quite busy with not only tourism but breeding of high value species, which I will explain a bit later when we get to that. What a high value species actually is. So that takes up a lot of my time at the moment. And then, of course, we have the rest of the area is extensive game, wilderness. So, I basically look after animals most of the time, and my staff, which can keep me busier at times than the animals.
I'm sure that's probably more of the hard part, right? And probably less predictable as well.
Very much so. And they talk back, of course.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about most animals.
Yeah.
So tell us about these high value species and what you need to do to look after them.
Well, the species that we refer to as high value species are basically animals that have a high value when it comes to selling them, and they have a high value because of their scarcity factor. So they aren't as scarce as they used to be because of the various breeding programs throughout South Africa. But the species we generally speak about are Sable antelope, Roan antelope, and the Cape buffalo. So those are the three that we deal with. There are others like rhino, sesame. We have a few sesame as well, but we basically breed them to increase numbers. And then once we have enough to sell, they're actually used to repopulate areas where they once roamed, and also to repopulate game reserves where they didn't necessarily roam, but where the owners of the reserves would love to have them. So that's basically what we do.
And are any of those species? I mean, you said they're quite scarce. So, any of them in a vulnerable category, or how do you? What are the sort of categories in terms of scarcity and
Yeah. Well, of the three, the one that was at risk a few years ago was the Roan antelope. I think the numbers were just in excess of 3,000 animals in the whole of South Africa,
Wow.
which resulted in us having to import Roan from neighboring countries. So most of the Roan on game reserves and game ranches in South Africa have been brought in. The initial stock were brought in from places like Malawi. But the numbers are looking a lot better now that people have started breeding them here. With the result that prices have come down a bit, making them more affordable for pretty much everyone that is interested in breeding with them. Sable were quite scarce at one stage, but at the moment because of the fact that they breed so well under intensive breeding conditions and semi-intensive breeding conditions, they've really flourished. And for example, about 5-6 years ago, a roan heifer, which is a young female, or sable, sorry, would sell for about 250,000 rand. You can do the maths to convert it to pounds.
Yeah.
At the moment, you can buy the same animal for about 20 to 30,000 rand. So, which is a massive,
Wow. So massive.
which has led to a lot of people which jumped in. I mean, it was game farming at one stage was one of the most lucrative businesses in South Africa, which resulted in big business men and women investing in these high value species.
And now they're not too happy with the value of their stock.
Yeah, exactly. Which has caused a lot of them to pull out of the industry. There are better things to invest in at the moment. So
Better returns, and
yeah,
it's really interesting. And obviously, when you're looking at game, it's still it's still farming. And even though some of these would be reserves, they still have, it'd still be categorized as your stock, and that has a value. And so it must be a little bit of a balancing act to, is there any incentive? Like, obviously you want to breed more so we can populate, but is there any incentive to restrict the breeding, to kind of swing the value the other way, and try and create a scarcity?
I think there would be certain people, businesses that would love to do that, to increase the scarcity of something. Obviously, they would make a lot more money. But I think we've reached the point now where, and we all predicted it. Everyone was waiting for this bubble to burst. When the value started skyrocketing in the early 2000s, and that carried on through to about 2016, people jumped in and made good money. The problem now is what we expected to happen, and which has happened, is that the value is pretty stable as a result of sustainable use of the species, the various species. And what I'm referring to there is the offtake in terms of harvesting. Southern Africa is huge when it comes to hunting, whether it's local or foreign hunters. And these three species are quite popular. And basically the price is pretty much being determined by what the hunting value is. Whereas in the past, the value was determined by scarcity, and female animals were just hugely lucrative. Whereas now the male animals are more lucrative because they are more sought after in the hunting industry.
Is that for sort of more the trophies and the horns?
Yeah, and that's where the value lies, unfortunately.
In the trophy, not the meat.
The meat as well, but the big value lies in the trophy. I must also add that a small percentage of animals actually reach trophy quality. We work on a percentage of between 3 and 5.
Only 3 and 5%
of a population or of a herd.
Yeah.
So if I had 1,000 sable on my property, 3% of those would be trophy quality. So it's not a huge amount that gets taken off by trophy hunters, but the added value, the accommodation and hunters coming into the country, the spin-off from this is just huge in terms of, and it all gets lumped into the tourism sector. That's where the value lies. Can
you tell us a little bit more about, you mentioned earlier, intensive and semi-intensive breeding conditions. What does that entail, and how do you ensure successful breeding programs, and also things like diversity within the genome and things like that?
Okay, so that's critical. That the diversity in the genome is one of our main concerns with this intensive breeding. So let me first just distinguish between intensive, semi-intensive, and extensive. So extensive is pretty much the animals do what they like. They roam freely, although not 100% free, as you can imagine. Most properties are fenced in South Africa, even in animals living within the bigger nature reserves like Kruger Park. They are closed in. At some point, if they keep walking, they'll hit a fence. Unlike areas in Kenya or Tanzania where it's just totally, there are no fenced game farms as such, like what we have in South Africa. So that's extensive. Semi-intensive is a situation where the animals are in a controlled area, but big enough where they can feed naturally. So you really don't have to supplement their diet very much, except if you have a drought or if you have a mineral deficiency in the area, because they can't move following the rains or move to a natural salt lick, or so you have to supplement even in a semi-intensive system. In an intensive system, the animals basically get put into a smaller camp. Anything from, in the past, guys were farming with herds like in areas of 250 hectares, which is still quite big, but not big enough for them to survive just on the natural veldt. So you'd have to supplement their diet with feed, especially during our winter months, which is our dry period, and our cold period. So they burn up a lot of energy then during the cold spells. And then in terms of the genetics, being in a small area like that, obviously one's concerned that you can experience inbreeding. And that is why we monitor the herds quite closely. They get the bulls, for example, we'd have 30 breeding females with a single breeding bull. And the genetic background or lineage of those animals are well known. Their family trees go back for many years. So like you would do with cattle farming or sheep farming, where you keep records, genetic records of your animals, the same thing applies here. So we know exactly where they come from, and as a result of that, we can prevent animals that are closely related actually breeding. So we would select a buffalo bull, for example, from a totally different bloodline to where our females' origins are.
You have to step in where nature would normally have done its thing because of the restraints on the area.
Yes.
and the natural selection predation to try and help things along.
Exactly. Yeah.
And do you do any artificial insemination, which is obviously huge in like sheep farming? Is that something that that's practiced with the wild game?
There are ongoing projects or research projects in this regard, but at this at the moment, it's not a common practice at all. So it's all um, natural breeding at this stage. But I'm sure going forward, when they've clicked the code, um, it might well happen. Yeah. Look, I know with certain species they've done it in a sort of laboratory style research on smaller species, but not on the bigger animals.
Yeah, and I guess in a small thing like a zoo setting or something like that, where
Yeah,
you
yeah,
have to, but on a
yeah.
larger scale, probably not practical yet.
No, definitely not.
And so, one of the eternal questions, really, in conservation and hunting, and the kind of the to and froing between the two kind of poles within that. I guess it's the paradox of hunting and conservation. Um, and obviously, as someone who's intricately involved in that, um, and the worth of the animal being literally a prescriptive value, you can very much determine that. Is that very much at play in South Africa? And how do you see kind of hunting, the control of hunting, playing out in the future? Is it still very popular? Is it on the wane? I see hunting in the States certainly has dropped off a lot, and I wondered if that was still the same in Africa, from your experience.
You're referring to people residing in Africa or people visiting?
Um, I guess both, because I think they're both important. And are they? Let's take both groups: the people residing in Africa and then visiting. And are they the same, or are they different in what they're looking for or what they're doing?
Definitely different in what they're looking for. Um, but to answer your first question with regards to our hunters, the numbers depleted, or becoming depleted, or what we're experiencing in within the trophy hunting sector, which is basically foreign visitors that are coming in to hunt specific animals for the trophies, which is basically the horns or the skin or the hide, or in some cases just a photograph, depending on what country you come from, because various countries have bans on various species.
Yeah.
But there, I wouldn't say there's much of a drop. The American market is huge, as are certain countries in Europe. What we are finding is there are definitely fewer younger hunters coming in. So I'm predicting that in the next quarter of a century, because of that age group not coming in to the market, that the numbers will be dropping.
And that's just the younger people are just not interested in that.
They've just grown up in a different environment where hunting doesn't hunting doesn't form a part of that environment.
Yeah. And do you think that's just generally people just feeling hunting isn't is cruel or not good for animals, and then contrasting that with people going, well, I would never hunt and kill an animal, but I'm happy pick it off the shelf at the supermarket.
Yeah, I think that is one of the problems, that people think it's cruel. I think probably in the majority of cases they think it's cruel, and it's to go out and kill an animal. But then again, a lot of them will eat meat. So whether you eating game meat or you eating a cow, a nice big steak, they both die. And I wouldn't be hesitant at all to say that an animal that gets hunted in its natural setting in most cases dies quickly, suffers less than an animal that gets transported to an abattoir and has to go through all that stress before it dies to fill our tummies, So
Yeah.
people don't always think of that. I also think that a lot of the younger generation don't understand hunting and how critical it is to manage populations and how critical it is to add value, because unfortunately, whether we like it or not, if a species has no value, it's not going to survive. It will fall by the wayside, and that's the beginning and the end of it all.
So if it has no value, if it has no monetary value, it's not valued.
Exactly.
And we see that right across ecological arguments. It's like, well, how much is clean air worth? How much is a unpolluted river worth? There's no monetary value attached to it. At least here we can say, hey, this animal is worth X amount, and so it's quite tangible to people. How much is that big ebony tree in the forest? How much is that worth? You can cut it down and plane it, but really the ecosystem, it's worth much more, isn't it? So I think it's a really interesting thing that hunting and game farming are adding to that conversation, is the actual adding of value to it so that it can be valued.
Yeah. And Tim, I'd just like to add with regards to this, to hunting and game farming in South Africa, but I haven't finished answering your previous question with regards to the difference between our local people and the foreigners.
Yes.
In the requirement from the animal, here it's not a matter of just being a sport and collecting a trophy, which many people are totally against, and I can understand that 100%. Why would someone go and kill an animal just for the horns or for the skin, and then go back to your country and hang it on the wall? That is just, some people's eyes, totally wrong. However, for many of us, it is also not ideal, but it adds so much value that we have to accommodate it. That value add just enables us to carry on conserving them. Locally, we have different issues and different problems. Here people have to put food on their plate every day. We've got 35% of our population in South Africa are jobless, and they just want to know where are they going to get their next meal from. So the wildlife industry in South Africa is more about feeding not just the people that come and hunt the animals, but the nation. And there's a big move at the moment in terms of actually making game meat available to the largest sector of our population, which historically have not had access to that protein source. So, it's a totally different scenario. And this is one of the problems we sit with, is that people from other continents have so much say in what actually happens in Southern Africa in terms of managing our game populations. But if they'd lived here, I think they'd change the attitude very quickly.
Just in terms of the needs of the people, in terms of having foreign investment come in terms of the trophy hunters and the sacrifice of those 3% of the trophy animals, but then you say the others being harvested for their meat, and I guess their skins and everything else getting processed and being put into the supermarkets to sell and provide for the local communities that are in and around the farms too, I'm sure.
Yes, I mean, there's a huge amount of meat that gets utilized by poor communities, and they are totally reliant on hunting for that. And it's not just hunting where people have this view or vision of a guy going out and shooting a whole load of animals, and I mean people actually believe this, and it just gets dumped because it's just a sport. Uh, that not 1 ounce gets wasted. Um, that every part of that animal gets used. You know, it's a critical part of protein within South Africa and the rest of Africa for that matter. You know, we're talking animals here, but this argument can be diverted to include the flora as well. I mean, people have to, especially in South Africa at the moment where we have load shedding for half the day.
So load shedding, just for the people who don't know, is the provider of electricity, Eskom in South Africa, has been underinvested for 25 years and is effectively been mismanaged and is crumbling. And so they will have, depending on where you are, the electricity will only be on for a couple of hours or maybe even longer. You know, and they'll be told UK between 12 and 4 you won't be having electricity, and it'll be on for a few hours. So this spreading out and sharing of electricity is has, you know, affecting all aspects and all industries. Sorry, Charles, just to elaborate a bit.
Yeah, no, thanks. So I mean, power is a big problem, and so firewood is in most communities they rely on firewood, especially in the rural areas, because some of them don't even have power laid on, and those that do are sitting with the problem now where half the day they have no power. So trees get chopped down, and just to survive. Animals get poached just to survive. These poor people go out and they set snares to have something to eat. We all throw our arms in the sky saying, wow, geez, the cruelty, the animals will get caught in snares and die the most horrific deaths. But in most cases, we would do exactly the same thing if we didn't have food on our plates. So, I mean, these are the issues we sit with in South Africa and the issues we have to try and manage. You know, fortunately, in the early 90s, South African law changed slightly in terms of game management. And landowners became legal owners of wildlife, which before that, it was res nullius. That whatever, if the animal appeared on your property, you were allowed to shoot it, but you know, for meat or whatever, with a license. But it didn't belong to anyone. It belonged to the state. Then that changed, and it became legal to own wildlife. And that was the result of this massive increase in animals and of game numbers in South Africa. It's a huge success story.
Well, I mean, it's so effectively taking state ownership and making it private ownership. You know, so you know, if we look at we were talking about Eskom, the energy provider, that was private, and now it's state owned, and it's unfortunate that sometimes state owned things don't get looked after and not valued, whereas in a private setting they might be.
It was actually earlier than the 90s. Sorry, I made an error there, but so that a few individuals with a bit of foresight developed the whole plan and sold the idea to government. And that was the beginning of this. I mean, the development of game farms just flourished. And as a result of that, many species survived. I mean, we would not have Roan antelope in South Africa if it wasn't for the private game farmers. And I dare to say that would also be the case when we talk Sable antelope, species like sesame, species like bontebok. They were all saved by private game farming. And unfortunately, hunting forms part of your management on most game farms. And well, whether people like it or not, that's just how it is.
That's as I said, Charles is gonna tell it how it is, and I think, you know, just bringing those truths home of balancing the needs of people and of wildlife and our ecosystems. And so, the world over, whether it's Amazon rainforest or being mowed down to make cattle farms to feed people, or if it's poaching in reserves for food, and trying to balance the needs of the people who might be starving or in poverty, and the needs and the protection of the animals. And you're right at the coalface there. Seeing, I bet within the last few hours, you've probably seen someone who's pretty close to the poverty line, and he's smiling at me now. So I know that, and he's in a pretty remote area, so it's going to be like that. And large areas of Africa, certainly sub-Saharan Africa, are like that. So it's that eternal balance, and I think you're striving to find that. I remember a while back, I think the last time we met, you were telling us a story about, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe you can tell us a story. It was about a hunter that had a certain number of licenses to shoot. I think it was some kind of bush pig or warthog or something like that. Do you remember the story, Charles?
I've got many stories. I'm not sure which one you're referring to, but
Okay. So, well, maybe you could tell us a story on how, so something that I would see is like someone who, not just a trophy hunter, but someone who just wants to go and kill animals, right? Because he's got a thing about, I'm saying him because I'm assuming it's mostly males, have a thing about wanting to shoot, and it's going to prove something about who he is and what he is. Maybe I'll tell the story as I remember it. Was you were guiding this chap around, but because he was from Europe, he couldn't sense the animals. He couldn't see the animals. His vision and his acuity wasn't there. So I think you let him shoot one, and then you realize this guy was just basically bloodthirsty, and you instructed the other trackers to not point any more out, because he was just going to shoot everything he saw, and you pull up the Land Rover right next to a bush, and just in that bush was the animal, and he literally couldn't see it because he wasn't attuned to the nature as you guys were. And I remember you telling the story and just chuckling. I wonder if you've got any other stories like that you could share from.
Well, yeah, I can tell you lots of stories about people coming over from other countries, and especially on their first couple of days in this wild place. It's quite scary, I think, for someone to just to come into the African type of environment and wilderness, because a lot of them are experienced hunters, but they get here and they fumble around like people that are green in terms of hunting. But I've become a lot more forgiving as I grow older, when guys battle in the first 2 days not to see something, or even miss an animal cleanly because they've got what we call bokkoors, which is an Afrikaans word for buck fever. So you get the shake so badly that you can't keep the crosshairs on the animal. But
is that just because the adrenaline's running, or they're just kind of overwhelmed by the situation and the environment?
They are normally overwhelmed, but there's this thing that happens, and people that have never hunted will never understand it. And I must tell you a story with regards to that. Even the most experienced hunters from time to time will get this reaction. I think it's a combination of excitement and fear of not making a good shot. And especially if an animal is approaching you and getting closer and closer, you think the closer an animal gets, the more relaxed you'll be with your shot. But because it starts increasing in size as it approaches you, many people don't realize how big the African antelope species are. And you can imagine an eland bull coming up close to you, and can weigh up to a ton. It's huge. If you're used to a little Bambi in a European forest, this is something unbelievable. And so you just rattle. But I had a tracker, Tim, that he had one eye.
One-eyed tracker.
His name was Isaac. In Afrikaans that would be Isak. And he was a brilliant tracker, and many of my trackers after him were taught by him. And he came to me one day after I'd picked him and a hunter up. He'd been guiding the guy, and he said he doesn't understand why these guys shake so much before they shoot the animal. And it happens too often. He can't understand this. And he was referring to this buck fever. And I said, well, Isak, there's only one way you're going to understand it, and that is if you actually go out and shoot an animal. Would you like to shoot an animal? Yeah, he'd love to go. He'd always wanted to hunt his own animal. And he'd been tracking his whole life, guiding people his whole life, and he'd never had the opportunity to hunt an animal himself. And he was very keen, so we taught him how to handle a firearm. He was on the range many days before we actually allowed him to actually approach an animal and hunt it. And we were stalking a springbok, which is our national animal, as you should know. And we couldn't get close enough that I was comfortable enough for him to actually take the shot. So we had to crawl on our bellies for about 100 yards to reduce the distance. And eventually we were in range, and I said, okay, Isak, get steady and put the crosshairs where I taught you to put them and pull the shot, squeeze the trigger. And when it came to squeezing the trigger, he got the shakes, the total shakes. He couldn't pull the trigger. So, and then normally what works well is if you give the guy a hard slap on the back or a lummy on the shoulder, just to pull him out of
his brain into his body,
psychological state. Yeah. And then he made a beautiful shot, and that's normally what works with anyone. It's just hammer him on his shoulders or on his back, and then they'll make a good shot. So Isak stood up after making a decent shot and said, now he understands what it's all about, what this buck fever is all about.
So even a complete, native and someone who's totally connected to the land would still have that experience. And I think there's whether you're stalking an animal to take a photograph or to shoot, there's something that heightens your senses and brings you really into a real stark focus with nature and everything. When you're crawling on your belly in the dirt, there's something very primal about that. And I've always known you as a very connected guy to nature, and your work obviously is just been totally second nature to you. Can you recall the first time that you because you're obviously very comfortable in the wild, the first time that you felt a real kind of like at home in nature or really connected to nature?
Yeah, I can actually. It was quite a strange experience, and I have my sister to thank for that. We grew up on a farm in the Western Cape. Not a game farm as such, but there was quite a bit of wildlife, and it was mainly a stock and fruit farm. But my sister, being a very musical lass, studied music eventually. But at junior school, she one of her subjects was music, and she started off with what they called a recorder, and then from there she progressed to the piano. And in the afternoons, we'd get home from school and she would have to practice. And Timothy George, if you know what it's like living in a house with a sister practicing music, it's absolutely horrific.
Especially the recorder.
Yes. And me being told that I have no musical talent whatsoever. I decided that as soon as I got home from school every afternoon, I'd get one of my little friends on the farm. He was a son of one of the workers, and we'd go out into the veld all afternoon until dark. And all we did was walk in the mountains, trying to track meerkats and little buck in the area that we had known as a grysbokkie. And we were in under the bushes looking for tortoises and trying to flush Franklin and all kinds of things. So that is where it was almost a forced appreciation for nature more than just a sudden happening in my life. It was a progressive thing which was forced on me because I couldn't bear being in the house. So so thanks to my sister for being musical, and thanks to my mother for telling me that I was not musical. So I skedaddled.
Your hand was forced.
Yeah, and it became a natural thing for me to be out in the velds, and whether it was, I think, tracking or bird watching.
Yeah, and I know you enjoy fishing now, and I think I can't think of a better place for you to be is out in the wilderness, helping our animals, just creating more of them and creating more abundancy and diversity for us. And so I just want to say thank you for your work. And I know you don't need any thanks because you love it, but we appreciate it, and thank you for sharing your insights into what for a lot of people is a very foreign area, in terms of nature conservation and game farming and how that relates to hunting. So thank you for sharing your insights. It's been for me, hugely interesting to understand some of those and the balances and the challenges that are, are not unique to South Africa, but the role that this plays in helping people and the environment. Thank you so much, Bud.
It's a big pleasure.
Yeah, so we're kind of running towards the end of the episode now, and if there's is there a parting word that you'd like to leave us with, some inspiration or a quote that we can remember to help kind of anchor us when we feel disconnected or wanting to connect with Africa and the wilderness there? I just dropped this on you.
Yeah, I've come to realize a few things as time grown on me. When I was a younger man, it was all about the action and excitement, especially with regards to the hunting side of it. When I started in this business, I wasn't a big hunter. And I would say still I'm not a big hunter. I'm a conservationist, and I was forced to understand that hunting forms a critical part in game management in Africa and in the rest of the world. But where the secret lies for mankind in general is education, and I think I'm starting to appreciate that more and more, and I'm becoming more and more involved in actually educating not only the younger generation, mainly the younger generation, but also some older folk. We need to show that we care. So what I mean by that is environmentally, and we need to show that we care for each other. And the easiest and the quickest way to do that is to teach people how to care for the environment, and then a natural flow from that is how to care for each other.
Oh, that's beautiful. So by caring for the environment, it's the natural thing that flows from that is to care for each other.
Yeah, there is no ways that we're really going to care for each other if we don't care for our natural environment. Because if we don't have that, everyone else is going to be running around in circles just trying to survive in 100 years' time.
We care for each other by caring for the environment. Man, it's beautiful. I knew you were going to drop a truth bomb on us, Charlie. We had to wait 45 minutes for it, but we got it. Thanks for the wisdom, man.
Oh, it's taken a lot of time, but it takes a lot of believing as well to get to that point. But yeah, hopefully I can, in my small way, make a difference.
Well, I know you are, and keep doing what you're doing. I know there's still long, hard yards to go, but we have faith in you and your mission and your drive. So thank you so much for showing today. And I'm glad the electricity held and we got it done in one take. So thank you, Charlie.
It's a big pleasure.
And yeah, you stay well, my friend.
Yeah.
Cheers, pal. Thank you so much for listening to The Natural You. I hope you got something useful out of this episode. If you think someone might benefit from hearing this, please share it with them. Lastly, I'd love it if you hit the subscribe button and rate and review this podcast. See you next week.